Psychology of struggles only high IQ people face. There is a kind of suffering the world rarely takes seriously, because from the outside it looks like an advantage. You are the person who notices what others miss. The person who reads tone changes hidden motives, contradictions, patterns, second-order consequences. The person who can see 5 outcomes before someone else has even finished the sentence. And for a while people call that intelligence. But then life gets more complicated. Because the same mind that helps you understand the world faster can also make it harder to rest inside yourself. The same awareness that helps you see deeply can make you feel painfully out of sync with people around you. And the same ability that makes you capable can quietly make you tired in ways other people do not understand. So in this video, I want to talk about the psychology of struggles only high IQ people seem to recognize from the inside. And I want to do it carefully. Quick disclaimer, this video is for education, not diagnosis. Not everyone who relates to these patterns has a high IQ, and not every highly intelligent person struggles in the same way. Some of these experiences can also overlap with introversion anxiety, ADHD, autism, trauma, burnout, or chronic stress. In psychology, IQ scores are standardized around a mean of 100, usually with a standard deviation of 15 or 16, and giftedness in intelligence is often categorized around 130 and above. But a title like this is shorthand, not a clinical judgment about you. Let's start with a real scene. You are in a meeting, or in a relationship, or lying in bed after a conversation that ended hours ago. Everyone else seems to move on, but your mind does not. You replay what was said. You analyze what was meant. You imagine what could happen next. You think about what you should have said, what you should not have said, and what this might reveal about everything underneath the moment. From the outside, that looks like overthinking. But the invisible wound is deeper than that. The invisible wound is this: your mind does not merely register events, it expands them. It turns moments into systems, words into signals, choices into branches, silence into possible meaning. And when that happens, all day, every day, life becomes mentally expensive. That is why many highly intelligent people do not just feel stressed, they feel overclocked, like their brain is constantly open in too many tabs. And modern psychology actually has a useful phrase for one part of this repetitive negative thinking. Researchers increasingly treat rumination and worry as overlapping forms of repetitive negative thinking because they are highly correlated, share core features, and help maintain distress across multiple disorders. So when a fast mind keeps looping, it is not always depth. Sometimes it is a cognitive process that has slipped from reflection into self-wearing repetition. Here is a very simple way to picture what is happening in the brain. On-screen diagram. Input someone's words, /a choice, /a problem, /a text message. Down. Arrow. Fast pattern detection. What does this imply? Down arrow. Possibility generation. What are the outcomes? Down arrow. Threat / meaning. Check. What if this goes wrong? What does this say about me? Down arrow. 2 paths. Action right. Arrow relief or looping analysis. Right. Arrow. Mental exhaustion. That last split is where many bright people get trapped. Because the brain that is strong at simulation is also strong at generating more branches than the nervous system can comfortably hold. So let's go deeper. One struggle only high IQ people often face is the loneliness of asymmetry. I do not mean dramatic loneliness, I mean the quiet kind. The kind where you can function socially. You can smile. You can be polite. You can even be liked. But very few people feel like home to your mind. You get bored with small talk, not because you think you are better than other people, but because your mind craves substance. You want meaning, tension, contradiction, subtext, ideas. And when most interactions stay at the level of weather logistics, gossip, and surface response, you start feeling emotionally underfed. The painful part is that people often misread this. They think you are cold, reserved, too serious, too much in your head. But many times the truth is simpler. You are not hard to connect with. You are just hard to meet superficially. And this matters because social connection is not just about the number of people around you. The U.S. Surgeon General's advisory emphasizes that social connection includes the structure, function, and quality of relationships. In other words, being surrounded is not the same as being understood. That is why some people feel lonely in a full room and relieved in one deep conversation. Another struggle is decision paralysis. This surprises people. They assume smart people should be decisive, but intelligence often multiplies variables rather than simplifying them. A highly analytical mind can see too many outcomes, too many trade-offs, too many possible regrets. It does not just ask, "What do I want?" It asks, "What will this cost? What will this become? What will this lead to 6 months from now? What am I not seeing yet?" And the mind calls that wisdom. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it is just a traffic jam. A major review of choice overload found that paralysis becomes more likely when choices are complex. The decision is difficult, preferences are uncertain, and the goal is not just choosing, but choosing correctly. That describes the inner world of many high IQ people almost perfectly. Too many branches, too much uncertainty, too much pressure to optimize. And then there is perfectionism. This one hurts because from the outside it can look admirable. High standards, conscientiousness, ambition, refinement. But what many people do not see is that perfectionism is often not a love of excellence. It is a fear of being diminished by error. It is the belief that if you are as capable as people think you are, then your mistakes should be smaller, rarer, less forgivable. That is why highly intelligent people can become some of their own harshest critics. They can see quality so clearly that ordinary human limitation starts to feel humiliating. And research backs that up. Perfectionistic concerns, especially excessive self-criticism, fear of mistakes, and discrepancy between standards and reality are strongly linked with distress, and studies also suggest that self-compassion can reduce some of the damage perfectionism does to well-being. One reflection worth adding here is this: a lot of smart people are not actually suffering from thinking too deeply. They are suffering from using thought as their main method of emotional control. That is a very different problem, because if your mind became your safest tool early in life, the thing that helped you anticipate, solve, avoid embarrassment, prevent pain, stay ahead, then you may unconsciously start using analysis everywhere. In work, in love, in identity, in grief, in self-worth. And analysis is powerful, but it is terrible at giving the nervous system the felt sense of safety it keeps trying to manufacture. Which brings us to another struggle, the inability to switch off. You finally lie down, and that is when the mind gets louder, because the world gets quiet, but the unprocessed loops stay active. If this happens to you, I want to make an important distinction. Sometimes this is just a habit of overstimulation. Sometimes it is anxiety. Sometimes it is sleep erosion feeding cognitive intensity. Sometimes it overlaps with ADHD-like symptoms or other forms of neurodivergence. That is one reason NIMH warns that stress, sleep problems, anxiety, depression, and other conditions can create similar symptoms and require proper evaluation rather than self-labeling. So what actually helps? Here is the first tool, and it sounds almost too simple: label the emotion before you analyze the story. Not "why am I like this?" Not "what does this mean about the future?" Not "let me replay the whole interaction again." Start with "this is disappointment. This is fear. This is overstimulation. This is shame. This is uncertainty. Why does that matter?" Because research on affect labeling shows that putting feelings into words can reduce emotional reactivity, including reduced amygdala response to negative emotional stimuli. In plain English, naming an emotion can lower the chaos enough for the brain to stop treating everything as a full-scale emergency. Second, give your mind a thinking boundary. A fast mind without boundaries becomes a maze. So try this practical structure. 10 minutes, 1 page, 3 prompts. What is the actual problem? What are my real options? What is the next physical action? Not the ideal action. Not the permanent answer. The next action. This matters because repetitive negative thinking weakens when thought becomes directional instead of circular, and CBT-based approaches appear effective at reducing that kind of looping. Third, reduce the number of choices before you decide. If you give a high simulation mind 20 options, it will often use all 20 against itself. So pre-limit the field. Not what is the best path in existence, just what are the best 2 or 3 realistic paths from here. That is not lowering intelligence. that is protecting it from drowning in its own branching power. Fourth, build quality connection, not social performance. A lot of deep thinkers exhaust themselves trying to fit into environments that reward speed charm, surface ease, and constant availability. Then they assume the exhaustion means they are bad with people. Maybe not. Maybe you just need fewer shallow interactions and more honest ones. Maybe you need conversations where you do not have to translate your inner world into something smaller just to keep the room comfortable. That is not arrogance. That is psychological nutrition. Fifth, protect sleep like it is part of your mental health plan. Because it is. A high-processing mind becomes dramatically harder to regulate when sleep is unstable. C. Guidance includes practical basics that matter more than people think. Keep the bedroom quiet and cool. Avoid caffeine later in the day. Turn off electronic devices at least 30 minutes before bed. And keep a consistent sleep schedule. These are not glamorous tips, but for people whose minds do not switch off easily. Basic sleep hygiene is often the difference between sensitivity and overload. And finally, stop turning every struggle into an identity. You are not your IQ score. Not your speed, not your overthinking, not your reputation for being the smart one. The most dangerous trap for highly intelligent people is not ignorance. It is identification. It is building a whole self-concept around being perceptive, capable, analytical, unusual, and then feeling secretly ashamed anytime you are messy, uncertain, emotional, tired, needy, or wrong. But that shame is not wisdom. It is just a very polished form of self-rejection. And real growth begins when intelligence stops being a throne and starts becoming a tool. If I were turning everything in this video into one sentence you could use today, it would be this: not everything your mind notices needs to become a problem your nervous system must carry. That sentence changes a lot, because the goal is not to think less deeply. The goal is to suffer less from the depth with which you think. And if some of what I described feels painfully familiar, please hear this clearly. You are not broken because your mind sees more. You are not weak because that awareness gets heavy. And you are not failing because your intelligence did not automatically teach you peace. Peace is a different skill. If your worry, insomnia, concentration problems, or emotional distress are persistent or interfering with daily life, please do not romanticize it as just being deep. Reach out to a qualified mental health professional. NIMH specifically notes that when worry becomes hard to control and starts disrupting sleep concentration or daily functioning, it deserves real support. So maybe the most mature truth is this: the psychology of high intelligence is not just about seeing more. It is about learning what to do after you see it, how to name what you feel, how to stop a spiral before it becomes a lifestyle, how to choose without demanding perfect certainty, how to protect your sleep, how to seek fewer but truer forms of connection, how to let your mind be brilliant without forcing it to be your prison. Because the goal was never to become less intelligent. It was to become safe, steady, and fully alive inside the mind you already have.